One of the things that we've been discerning as we've been studying end times prophecy is what type of government is unfolding, because there's been this narrative in the Western world, at least, that communism is the devil, right? Like our parents' generation, or at least my parents' generation, were always talking about communism. That was like the thing, like, oh, you go over and introduce yourself to your new neighbors to make sure they're not commies. That's been on everyone's alert for a long time. And how did that come into being? Why has communism been identified as such a threat? Well, let's just go back into history. What are those 7 kingdoms? Who's the antichrist? Who took down the antichrist? And who's the false prophet? All right? Write 1 through 7 on your piece of paper. Number 1, we're told in Daniel 2 that it begins with Babylon. So all you got to do is look into history. Babylon fell to Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia fell to Greece. Greece fell to pagan Rome. Pagan Rome fell to papal Rome. There's your antichrist. Papal Rome fell to communism. Through Napoleon, they fell to communism. And then communism was brought down by the United States with the help of Pope John Paul II. There's your false prophet testifying to the antichrist. United States, false prophet, antichrist, papal Rome. It's a kingdom. You can argue all day that it's a human being. I have demonstrated based on scripture that this is a kingdom. That's what it's identified as in Revelation 17 and in Daniel 7 and in Revelation 13. So, you can try to argue it, use scripture, or I won't respond. This is the reason why communism has been identified as such a threat, because they took down the Antichrist. And so you have the Western world constructing this narrative that communism is the enemy. The false prophet of the United States, the 10 Germanic tribes that became Western Europe, and the Antichrist that begins with papal Rome, with the Catholic Church, the Vatican, which is a sovereign, independent territory with a permanent seat on the United Nations because they are a beast, and a beast that in the word is defined as having global power, being a unification of church and state. It was in power before, then it fell, and it's going to rise again. And when did it fall? It fell when communism took it down. So what are we waiting for? For it to rise again. Discern the times. So should we be concerned about communism? Not really. That's not the enemy. It hasn't been the enemy from the beginning. If you know who the Antichrist is, you know that the Antichrist is not communist, even though that's the counterfeit Christian narrative that bore out of the Catholic Church and continues in the prostitutes that bore out of her. That's how that narrative came into being. But what do you see unfolding right now? Well, Israel just passed a law reducing the power of the courts, guys. What happens when the executive branch has more power? What happens when those checks and balances are unbalanced in the power that they wield? We're moving into fascism. And if you have grown up thinking that communism is the enemy, let's go ahead and compare and contrast fascism with communism. Fascism encourages authoritarianism, national unity, and frequently racist and xenophobic viewpoints. I'm just taking this from the first article that comes up really on Google, which is geeksforgeeks.org. Okay, I don't have a leaning towards, this particular article. Fascism encourages authoritarianism, national unity, and frequently racist and xenophobic viewpoints, whereas communism advocates equality, shared ownership, and the abolition of social classes. What's worse? And do you see this description rising right now? Both in Israel and in the United States, are we now encouraging authoritarianism? Because the last few years, I would say that that's about right. You must get the jab. You must conform to our ideology. National unity around counterfeit Christian ideas, even called Christian nationalism. And let me ask you about racism. For those counterfeit Christians who love to call me racist, when all I'm doing is speaking on the word and saying this is a spiritual war, not a race war, not a flesh and blood war, but it's counterfeit Christianity that is promoting racism, they're the ones saying that genocide is okay. They're the ones justifying a group of people by their race Who's the racist one here? Let me tell you a little bit about the government that is going to happen during the Antichrist reign. Daniel 11, verse 36. The king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things about the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. Okay, and in verse 31, it says his armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, but many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. Is this sounding a little bit more like what we're seeing? Russia is not the enemy, guys. As a matter of fact, Russia has every right to do what they're doing. You know, the United States, when that wall came down, they made an agreement with Gorbachev that they would not be moving what was the language? Not 1 inch to the left, that the West would not move 1 inch to the left. So we broke our agreement and we've been expanding NATO. Do you think that this is like maybe a little provocative to Putin? This video is not to defend anybody, but I mean, come on. The West does not have any integrity whatsoever. They say whatever they want to get what they want, and they don't hold to their promises. And then we go and make up a narrative that, essentially the Antichrist is communist, and we wonder why we're not liked. So who has been a fascist leader in the past? I wonder. Adolf Hitler? Mussolini? I mean, because these are some people who did some things that look a lot like the description of the Antichrist. And this is where our government is headed. And it's going to happen very quickly because it's not just Germany. This is all of Europe and the United States. It's happening in Israel. This is going to mobilize what we have read about in the Word into a time that the world has never known. I want to put that bug in your ear. I don't think there's any more that needs to be said about this, but I do think that there is some praying and discerning and sitting with this that needs to happen, because that's a huge lie in counterfeit Christianity. I hear people talk about this all the time, just in like regular conversation, as though it's fact that the Antichrist is going to be communist and that's what they're trying to do. No, communism is sweet compared to what they're trying to do. Please discern with God. And another thing that you need to be discerning is the narrative that keeps coming back here to the West, that Palestinians are terrorists, right? They're desperate, you guys. They're desperate. What else are they supposed to do? They keep getting attacked by Israel. Or that everybody in Russia hates Putin. How do you know that? Says who? You don't know that. It's true what God has said. Take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to help your brother take the speck out of his. We're living in the enemy, and you need to know who the real enemy is.